and the infrared layer she swore meant nothing. I make old surfaces tell the truth without cracking. That's what conservation really is: persuasion. Oil that forgot its flexibility, canvases that shrank into themselves, varnish turned nicotine. I talk in solvents and swabs, microscopes and patience. Under raking light I can see the brush hesitate, U-turns beneath the skin of paint where a hand changed its mind. The lab smells like clove oil and warnings. I take pictures no one else gets to see. Ultraviolet for varnish, X-ray for bones, infrared reflectography for the ghosts of decisions buried under color. Mara fell for me in a gallery where the alarm barely tolerated our breath. She was a curator then, but even before the placard caught up with her, rooms obeyed. She walked through them like they should confess what they meant. After a panel where three men argued about patina and authenticity, like they'd invented either, she caught me staring at a tiny abraded crescent on a 17th century shoulder and asked if I was going to fix that flirtation. I said, not without consent, and she smiled the way varnish does when it learns the right solvent. We made a life out of one long, careful happening. I brought home the language of ground layers and tensioning keys, taught her to love the sound a brittle canvas makes when it forgives a little. She taught me how to write a wall label that didn't humiliate what it loved. At night we cooked barefoot, wine breathing, elbows touching at a sink we never measured properly. There were other things, greedy and generous and ordinary in the best sense, the kind of heat that feels like a room you built right. The painting that tilts this story mostly belonged to the museum, partly to the public, and aggressively to a donor named Rathbone. He had money that thought it was lineage, a jawline that yanked his tie straight, and a hunger for attribution like a drought. The canvas was catalogued as Circle of De Vries, 17th century, close enough to be expensive, far enough to keep him nervous. If any of my machines could give us a signature, the wall label would upgrade by a decade and a decimal point. The exhibition was ours, Mara's to make sing, mine to make breathe, his to pretend he birthed. He came to site visits like it was church. One Thursday, the lab swallowed the painting. I unframed it the way you touch a child's forehead for fever. It was larger than my desk wanted and smaller than his ego. Under ambient, the glaze looked like melted honey that had cooled mid-sigh. Under ultraviolet, it lit up in screams where previous cleanings had been cavalier. I made notes in my careful handwriting, the kind of list that forgives me later when a solvent kisses too hard. And then I wheeled the infrared rig over and let the camera find the underdrawing. It took a minute for the image to assemble itself, like fog agreeing to be a map. Charcoal lines surfaced, first shy, then definite. A hand different from the final one, a bolder angle on the jaw, a sash that never made it to color, an inscription sketched in under a dry brush. I zoomed. The letters were backwards, a mirror's habit, then obedient. Faint but there. In the hand I had compared a dozen times in the last year. D, V, and a flourish like somebody signing in a hurry to keep from getting caught wanting to be seen. My chest went ridiculous. We'd spent months with Circle like a chaperone. If I could demonstrate authorship, he'd fund us for the next decade, and Mara's show would turn into a verb people used in other cities. I breathed through soft, stupid joy and shot the infrared mosaic in overlapping plates until the computer could stitch it without lying. I should have texted her. I didn't. I wanted to watch her face teach the room how to be civilized about a miracle. Instead, around 5, while the image processed into its hush, I took the conservation report draft and went upstairs to the main galleries, thinking I'd find her in the Dutch room telling a family the difference between observation and nostalgia. She wasn't there. Her office was empty except for a sweater pretending to be responsible on the back of a chair. I found a note on her desk that said Faulkner, 20 min. She doesn't abbreviate often. When she does, it's to make a problem get smaller on paper. The Faulkner is a hotel with a terrace that loves its own glass. The city has a few rooftop bars. This one sells relief in tall lines. I know it because we sometimes went there after openings when you have to prove to yourself that your feet still remember how to be personal. The elevator said nice things and brought me up. The heaters hummed like guilt pretending to be ambient. Rathbone stood near the railing, phone flat on his palm like a recent convert. Mara stood in profile, chin up, not exactly cornered, but the geometry there had ambitions. It is possible to dislike a donor's idea of grace without punishing the painting. That is a professional sentence. The personal version is less good. I watched him step in too comfortably and offer his hand underneath an apology. "We can be bold together," he said low. She answered with that half-laugh people learn so they can decline without paying rent for it later. "We can be ethical together," she said. I could have gone to the lab. I could have written her the text I wanted to live in. The underdrawing is signed. Come breathe. I'm the sort of man who tells rooms they don't get to have everything. I walked forward enough for her to see me and forgive herself the time it took to get distance. She did. He glanced at me like he'd remember my first name if the plaque did. "Ah," he said, and held out a hand like a contract. "Our magician." "Conservator," I said. "Magicians leave no evidence. I take pictures of secrets." "She needs to feel how the world responds when she asks for more," he said to me, "which is how men talk when they want to hire you as a witness." "She knows," I said. "She lives with me." He laughed, extravagant like the expensive part of an evening. He made a little bow that would have belonged in a better century. "Resolve your energies, kids," he said, and drifted to the sponsors who want to be fed on time. We didn't fight there. Hotels are bad venues for anything except staging. We went home. In our kitchen, the window tried to sell us a sky. I made tea to give my hand something to tell right from wrong. She sat on the counter like she makes gravity a choice. "He got close," she said. "I let him feel ridiculous. Then I thanked him for boxes we already owned." "Say no faster," I said, "or say it to me first." "Jealousy looks adolescent on you," she said, then softer. "Show me the miracle so I can stop defending air." I did. In the lab in the dark that belongs to my machines, I pulled up the infrared mosaic. The underdrawing bloomed, lines soft and obedient until they felt brave enough to be themselves. The signature glowed like a bruise finally admitting the truth of its color. She swore quietly, reverently, the curation equivalent of a holler. "You beautiful bastard," she said, to the dead hand, not to me, and I loved her more for getting the grammar right. "Can you write it in the report the way the board will understand?" "I can write it so their grandchildren will," I said. We printed a still and laid it next to the painted surface like an X-ray next to a chest, and for a minute the room had the good kind of silence. She leaned into me the way people do when their body wants to pay a tithe to a day. I kissed her hair because my mouth knows how to behave in the lab. The next week was measured in polite staccato. She argued rehabilitated provenance with a registrar who thinks provenance is a hobby. I diluted gels and removed varnish until the painting learned its own range again. Rathbone came down twice with a tie that knew how to admire itself. He admired me for being good in the specific way that lets men keep thinking they did the magic. "This is the institutional tone," he said to Mara, nodding at the signature print. "We're friends with history now." "Careful," she said. "History takes its own photos." The night before the press preview, I stayed late to finish a seam repair nobody would see. She had a board dinner where the menu uses pleats as punctuation. I cleaned my hands, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to find a coat I should have brought. Her office light cut a wedge into the hall. I heard voices. There is a very specific way rustle and low talk sound when proximity only barely knows what it's doing. It wasn't disaster loud. It was lazy and precise. I stopped in the doorway because I have lived long enough to watch 1,000 rooms audition for witness. Sitting on her desk as if it had always been furniture with opinions was the infrared print. Rathbone was beside her at an angle polite people pick. His hand cupped the air near her hair like it had an argument with gravity. She had her hands on the print, fingers pressing the flourish like punctuation. He was saying the sort of thing people say when they want you to believe the present is an annex of the future. "They will say your name under mine," he said. She looked at his mouth without aiming herself at it. I wanted to leave and record and unspool and sew, and none of those verbs were useful. She turned her head and her eye caught mine. It is a terrible thing, that transaction, seeing someone see you while standing somewhere you hate. She moved. She made space. It wasn't performative. It was the expensive kind of honesty where half a second costs a year. "Out," she said to him without apology. "We're closed." He performed offense like a man testing his range. He lifted both hands, backed away as if he wanted the camera to be kind. "We're a good thing," he said in the plural, and I wanted to stack dictionaries between him and every room he will ever enter. "Sleep, both of you. Good morning is expensive." He left. It was just us and the hum of the conservation fridge down the hall and the faint whine of a ballast that somebody should replace. She laughed, small and wrecked. "He thinks I'm an extension of his wall," she said. "You let him measure," I said. "Then you remembered a ruler." "I needed him when I didn't have this," she said, touching the little freak miracle signature as if it were a wrist. "I forgot I didn't anymore." We stood with the kind of anger that isn't loud because it has other things to do. She stepped toward me. I didn't move. I let her put her hands under my shirt the way people do when they don't want to ask forgiveness with their mouth. We kissed until my teeth remembered my name. She broke off first. "I should sleep," she said. "We have to comb the entire city's hair in the morning." We going home felt like making a box you want to keep repeating. In bed, she put her leg over mine and called it a treaty. We were not cinematic. We were good. We stopped before the day owed us itself. Into my throat, she said, "I'm sorry I let him approach my air." I said, "I'm sorry I take pictures of ghosts when the living deserve more frames." Morning wanted to hire a trumpet section. The press came like hope you can invoice. Rathbone did not add himself to the stage. The board had the decency to keep him in the second row, where he vibrated in the way money does when it remembers its first kiss. The piece gleamed. The wall label had shifted just enough to make Mara's eye go hot. De Vries without a chaperone. The room took a breath and kept it together. After, while I stood near the painting pretending to protect it from hands that wanted to count, the chief conservator squeezed my arm like pride dressed as protocol. Reporters asked me to explain infrared reflectography like it was witty. I told them it's a way to see what a painter pretended not to have decided. Mara did the dance well, giving history enough credit not to let the present get greedy. Rathbone fielded a question about acquisitions with all the charm exhaustion can buy. That night she did not go to the Faulkner. She came home with the kind of tired that wants an alibi and a mouth. We made an alibi. We made a mouth. We owed the city nothing for 5 hours. We wrote rules on a sticky note on the fridge, the only place laws get obeyed. No terraces alone. No donors without 3 chairs. No lying about what we heard. I added, no miracles on nights I'm not home to say their names first, and she underlined it 3 times and bit my shoulder as if to notarize. Weeks later, the show settled into itself. People came, eyes serious, hands folded the way you fold your own desire backward when you're trying to act polite. I finished the treatment, secured the edges, made sure the stretcher would not sigh so loud the wall could hear it. I brought Mara coffee in the old studio where the air smells like linen and jokes. "We did good," she said into the cup. "You did brave," I said. "Not alone," she said, then made the face that means she's about to ask a favor that isn't actually small. "Show me again. The underneath." We went down to the lab and I turned off the big lights and we stood in front of the monitor like teenagers outside the place their bodies learned to be more interesting than shame. The underdrawing glowed like an X-ray of a choice. She touched the screen, then my wrist, then my mouth. I put my hand at the back of her neck where heat is most fluent. We kissed till the machines blushed in their stupid way. We stopped because I know how to touch paws without fear now. Sometimes I still think about his hand in the air near her hair and feel a heat that isn't elegant. Sometimes she still thinks about a terrace that sells permission and feels a smash she shouldn't have to name. We do the work. She texts me before a room lies. I bring her underdrawings when the world tries to paint over her. We are a museum. We keep, we clean, we forgive, we label. We argue about what the verb is. We erect a rope around the few things that are not for touching. We let the right people lean close. Infrared only goes so far. It doesn't reveal everything. Sometimes the charcoal never bit the ground and the camera loses. That's all right. I like that some choices stay unphotographed. In our apartment there is a sketch above the bed, a quick flourish she bought in a flea market because it reminded her of a wrist she knew. No signature, no provenance. This is how we live. The underneath we earned, the surface we made, the two of us in the same light, careful, dangerous, shamelessly ours.